woman handed over $1 for a house that hadn't had running water, working heat or electricity in years, and then taught herself how to fix it by watching YouTube videos the morning she started each job. Her name is Tia Weston, and if you think the dollar is the most interesting part of this story, you're about to find out why everything that came before that transaction is the part nobody slows down long enough to explain. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a health insurance worker from Louisville, Kentucky, ended up alone in a collapsing cottage in the middle of North Dakota, and why, against every reasonable expectation, it was the smartest move she ever made. Before a single dollar changed hands, there was a very different life happening in Louisville, Kentucky. Tia Weston was born on January 16, 1995, and grew up in Fairdale, a working-class suburb on the southwest side of the city. Her parents, Brad and Cindy Weston, raised Tia and her younger brother Brent in a household that valued practical work. There was nothing flashy about the upbringing, and Tia has never pretended otherwise. What she had was a community she knew, a city she understood, and a stable enough life that by her early 20s, she had done what a lot of people her age were trying to do. She bought a house. That first home in Louisville was the beginning of the story most people skip. Tia purchased it as a primary residence, not a project. She was working a job in health insurance at the time, the kind of role that looks solid on paper, a steady paycheck, benefits, the sort of adult stability that most people in their early 20s are still trying to find. On the surface, she had it together. Then the pandemic arrived. The COVID-19 years hit Tia's financial situation harder than she expected. Her health insurance salary, which had covered the mortgage when things were normal, suddenly wasn't enough. The cost of living was climbing. Her mortgage payments weren't getting any smaller. And month after month, she found herself doing the math and coming up short. In her own words, she was living paycheck to paycheck. Not in a vague general sense, but in the real, grinding, nothing left over sense that most financial headlines never quite capture. The mortgage felt like it was swallowing everything. The decision she made next wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a plan she'd had written down somewhere. It was the kind of choice people make when staying still starts to feel more dangerous than moving. She sold the Louisville house. That sale would end up being the first domino in a chain of events that nobody watching from the outside could have predicted. And if you think selling a house during a pandemic and walking away from your hometown is the bold part of this story, you haven't heard where she went next. She moved to North Dakota. Not Nashville, not Denver, not a city where young women with ambition and a real estate instinct go to rebuild. North Dakota, a state with a population of roughly 780,000, where the winters are brutal and entire towns exist with fewer residents than a Louisville apartment block. The logic, once you understand it, is actually exactly as practical as Tia herself. Housing prices in North Dakota are dramatically lower than in most of the country. A city like Louisville, even pre-pandemic, was seeing property values climb beyond what a single income could comfortably sustain. In North Dakota, houses regularly traded below $100,000. For someone who had just sold a home and had cash in hand, and a growing belief that she could do more with property than just live in it, that price difference wasn't a curiosity, it was an opportunity. But moving to a small town in North Dakota at that age, without a job lined up, without family nearby, without a community already in place, is not something most people do. It requires a specific tolerance for starting from zero. Tia had that, whether it was stubbornness, practicality, or the particular kind of courage that looks like recklessness from the outside. She packed up and went. She bought her first North Dakota home for $60,000. This wasn't the dollar house. This was the proving ground. Tia renovated it. She had no formal construction training, no contractor's license, no background in trades, no years of watching a father fix things around the house on weekends. What she had was the ability to break a job down into steps small enough to learn one at a time, and the willingness to ask questions of neighbors, of contractors she hired for the technical work, and increasingly of YouTube, which became her most reliable teacher. She sold the renovated North Dakota house for a $30,000 profit. 2 houses, 2 flips, one in Louisville, one in North Dakota. Each one built on a combination of practical necessity, financial instinct, and a willingness to do the work herself. By the time she started looking for her third property, she wasn't a beginner anymore. She was something more specific, a self-taught renovator who had figured out, slowly and without any formal training, that she was actually good at this. What happened when she went looking for that third house is the part that changes everything about what you just heard. The house that was supposed to be third in the sequence didn't pan out. Tia had found a property she was interested in. She got far enough into the process to look seriously at it, to start running numbers and imagining what it could become. Then the inspection came back. The foundation was compromised. Not a minor fix, not the kind of problem you tackle with a YouTube tutorial and a weekend of hard work. The deal fell apart. She walked away. The seller, however, didn't disappear from the conversation. This is the detail that rarely gets told in the way it deserves to be. After the foundation deal collapsed, the seller mentioned something in passing. There was another property, not listed, not on the market, a house that had been sitting there, being used for storage, that the seller hadn't had the heart to let go of. It was the home he had grown up in, and it had reached the point where the local fire department had identified it as a candidate for training exercises, which, in practical terms, means the plan was to set it on fire and let it burn. That cottage was so far gone, in the assessment of the people responsible for these decisions, that its most useful function was as fuel. The seller didn't want that. It was his childhood home. Whatever state it had fallen into, whatever years of neglect had done to the structure and the systems inside it, there were memories attached to those walls. So when Tia asked about it, genuinely because she had nothing left to lose at that point, and the worst answer was simply no, the seller gave her an answer she hadn't expected. He told her he would basically give it away to someone willing to fix it. She never talked about this publicly. Until now. The $1 price tag is the part of this story that travels fastest, and it's also the part that gets misunderstood most consistently. Tia didn't pay $1 because the house was worth $1. She paid $1 because the seller needed a number, any number, on the paperwork to make the transaction legal. The dollar was symbolic. It was a formality. It was the minimum required to record a property transfer, not a reflection of what either party actually understood the exchange to involve. What the exchange actually involved was a commitment. On Tia's side, the implicit agreement was clear. She would take a structure that was scheduled to be destroyed, and she would put it back together. No running water, no heat, no electricity, no functional plumbing. The house had been stripped of the basic requirements for human habitation not through vandalism or disaster, but through decades of neglect, the kind of slow, quiet failure that happens to buildings nobody is watching. The renovation budget Tia set for herself was up to $30,000, a number that sounds significant until you consider what $30,000 worth of work means in a house with no working systems. She hired a contractor for the electrical and the furnace. Those were the two jobs she identified early on as outside the range of what she could responsibly teach herself from scratch. Everything else, she said, she would figure out. The roof, the plumbing, the floors, the walls. She would wake up the morning of each job, find the relevant tutorial, and start. That approach, learning the skill the morning she needed it, is one of the less discussed aspects of the renovation. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't content creation posturing. It was the honest method of someone who had already done 2 houses and understood that most renovation work is just a series of problems that other people have already solved and filmed. You look it up, you try it, you fix what you get wrong. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. At some point in the renovation of the $1 house, Tia Weston stopped being a woman fixing a house and became a woman fixing a house on camera. The transition from private project to public series was not the product of some carefully developed content strategy. The renovation itself was the content. The house's condition, no water, no heat, a structure condemned enough to be scheduled for fire training, was inherently visual, inherently dramatic in the way that only real things can be. Viewers didn't watch because Tia told them it was compelling. They watched because you could see the scope of the problem in every frame. The channel grew around the weekly cadence she established. New videos every Sunday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time. That consistency, maintained without fail across months of hard physical work in a North Dakota winter, built the kind of audience that renovation content earns specifically. People who come back not for the personality, but for the progress. They want to see what changed. They want the before and the after, and they want enough of the middle to understand how the gap was closed. Tia had no formal construction training going into any of this. She said so clearly and repeatedly. What she had was a track record across 2 previous properties, a tolerance for cold, difficult work in an environment most people wouldn't choose, and the willingness to fail on camera when something didn't go right the first time. That last part matters more than most people give it credit for. The audience for renovation content is not naive. They can tell the difference between a polished DIY persona and someone genuinely working through problems in real time. The subscribers came. By the time the $1 house project began generating press coverage, she was documenting the renovation for over 100,000 subscribers. The channel has since grown far beyond that. Her Facebook page alone, as of mid-2026, has crossed 1.5 million followers, a number that has very little to do with luck and almost everything to do with showing up every Sunday for years. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. By late 2025, Tia announced what the audience had been watching toward for months. The $1 house was finished. Not finished as in good enough, finished. A building that had been condemned, stripped of every functional system, identified as appropriate only for burning to the ground, transformed into a home. Structural repairs, new plumbing, electrical, windows, flooring, all of it, in a town where houses regularly sell for under $100,000. The renovation Tia completed represented a meaningful addition to the community's housing stock, not just a personal project. The community dimension of her work is something Tia has spoken about directly, and it adds a layer to the story that the Dollar House headline consistently leaves out. She lives in a small town in North Dakota. She has said herself that there are empty houses all over it, properties sitting dormant for years, sometimes decades, because the math of renovation never quite worked out for whoever inherited or held the title. Her stated goal isn't simply to flip properties for profit. It's to bring those houses back to life and get people living in them. She's described it as something that genuinely helps the town every time it happens. That framing matters because it changes the nature of what the channel documents. This isn't a renovation show in the traditional sense, where the transformation is the product and the creator is the talent. It's a record of someone trying to solve a practical community problem, one abandoned structure at a time, while teaching herself the skills she needs as she goes. After announcing the $1 house was complete, she didn't stop. She announced her next project almost immediately, a second abandoned property she'd acquired for $15,000. This house had been frozen in time since December 2005, when its previous owner passed away. The cigarette butts were still in the ashtray. The dishes sat on the drying rack, exactly where they'd been left. A calendar on the kitchen wall was still showing December 2005. In some places, you could see straight through the damaged floorboards into the basement below. The number that came next, nobody who followed this channel expected it. Most coverage of Tia Weston focuses on the dollar. Some of it reaches as far back as the North Dakota flip. Almost none of it spends real time on what the Louisville years actually meant. Here's what gets missed. Tia didn't arrive in North Dakota with a renovation identity already formed. She arrived as someone who had been squeezed out of a life that wasn't working and had the presence of mind, or the desperation depending on how you want to look at it, to go somewhere she could afford to try something different. The health insurance job wasn't a detour, it was the baseline. A young woman from a working-class suburb of Louisville, doing an administrative job in a sector she hadn't chosen out of passion, making enough to cover a mortgage until she couldn't cover it anymore. That experience of watching a financially stable life slowly stop adding up is what made the decision to move to North Dakota possible. When you've already watched a plan fall apart, starting from scratch in an unfamiliar place carries less risk than it looks like from the outside. She also has no partner documented in any of this. No co-host, no spouse, no person she moved with. Every house she has bought, renovated or committed to in North Dakota, she has approached alone. The solo camping content she also produces, driving a Buick Enclave with a homemade pull-out kitchen built into the back, reinforces the picture of someone who has constructed her life specifically to function on self-sufficiency. That isn't a personality quirk. It's a decision made over years, shaped by a pandemic, a mortgage she couldn't sustain, a relocation most people wouldn't take, and a series of increasingly difficult renovation projects completed without a cosigner or a backup plan. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. As of mid-2026, Tia Weston is still in North Dakota, still posting every Sunday, still renovating. The second abandoned property, the one frozen in December 2005, is her current project, and by every measure it is more complicated than the $1 house. The foundation is crumbling. The plaster is coming off the walls. The floorboards in some areas have rotted through entirely. She bought it for $15,000 and has described the scope of what's ahead with the same matter-of-fact clarity she brought to the $1 house. Not dramatized, not minimized. Just the list of problems, in the order she plans to address them. Her audience by this point is not the same audience that clicked on the first video, wondering whether the dollar house premise was real. These are people who have watched her rip out walls and learn plumbing and push through North Dakota winters with no working heat in a building she's committed to finishing. They've seen her get it wrong and then get it right. That kind of sustained attention, not viral moments, but weekly loyalty across years, is what has built a following that sits above 1.5 million on Facebook and nearly 400,000 on Instagram. The channel is also not a one-format operation anymore. Alongside the renovation content, she produces solo camping videos, evidence that the outdoor, self-sufficient life she's building in North Dakota isn't just a backdrop for house projects. It's a genuine lifestyle, documented because it's being lived. What comes after the 2005 time capsule house is not publicly announced, but given the mission she's described, working her way through the abandoned properties in her small North Dakota town, there's no indication that she's looking for an exit from the project she's given herself. The dollar house was never really about the dollar. It was about what a woman from Louisville, Kentucky, built out of a pandemic-era financial squeeze, a willingness to relocate somewhere most people wouldn't go, and the particular stubbornness required to teach yourself a trade one YouTube video at a time. The $1 price tag is the headline. The years that came before it are the story. Right now, Tia Weston is somewhere in a small North Dakota town, working on a house that was abandoned the year after her 10th birthday, pulling it back from 20 years of decay the same way she's handled every property before it, methodically, without a safety net, one problem at a time. Her next chapter is already happening, documented every Sunday for an audience that has watched her earn every bit of the reputation she now has. So here's the question worth asking. Tia walked away from a stable job, a familiar city, and a conventional path, and ended up building something most people her age are still waiting to find. Would you have had the nerve to make that same call, or is that the kind of risk that only makes sense in hindsight?